Psalm 19, almost to the end. Last time in verse 14, this is the last verse. And in verse 14, last time I talked about, may the words of my mouth, the words of our mouth, the power of words. I want to come back to that because there's an aspect of the power of words that I didn't talk about that's valid and valuable. I did talk about the power of words that we speak to others and that others speak to us. And there is this other aspect, in my experience, both as a person, as a pastor, as a counselor. The power of the words that we say to ourselves may be more powerful than the words someone else would say to us. I believe that most people have, without meaning to, have developed an inaccurate sense of who they are and what their value is. Their identity, without them meaning for it to, has become it's been held hostage by what the words that other people have spoken into their life. It's heartbreaking to me when I think about the folks that I've counseled who were told by important people in their lives, by parents, teachers, coaches, sometimes siblings, and the message was, you'll never amount to anything. Those powerful words that they heard from someone else now are words that just play on a continuous loop in their own mind. And by now, most of them I have had to help them hear whose voice that was, because they thought it was their voice. It had become so entrenched that it, for them, didn't even sound like someone else's voice. The person who spoke that message into them. Okay, so the power of the words I tell myself about myself is incredible. One of my I have two favorite questions in counseling. The one favorite question is, what would that look like? Or what does that look like, depending on the situation. And the reason for that is we often want to have a better life, do better, be better, but we don't have a picture of what that would be. We have. It's pretty cruel for me to say we don't have any idea, but for a lot of people, they don't have any conscious idea of what a better life, a better person, better choices would look like. Okay, second question on my list of two favorites. If you believed about yourself what God says He believes about you, how different would your life be? Well, the answer to that is lots. We can't, it's not quantifiable, is it? Well, the words of my mouth, which go back in through my ears about myself, are incredibly powerful. I said there are very few people who have an accurate understanding of and belief about themselves. We're on extremes. On one extreme, we feel like those people who told me I never amount to anything, they were right. I'm useless. I'm hopeless. I'm stupid. There's about 100 other things. And on the other side of it is, on the far extreme is, I'm the greatest. What's not to love about me? Well, I'm always the smartest person in the room. Every time I pass a mirror, I'm reminded of how incredibly handsome or beautiful I am. Every time I speak, even E.F. Hutton listens. You got to be old to get that reference. But either one of those extremes leads us into, well, trouble. I want to live as best I can in the realistic middle between this very negative thought of myself and this overwhelmingly and unrealistically positive view of myself. I want to be in the middle. I want the words of my mouth, the words that I tell myself, I want them to be realistic. And the most realistic for those words are going to come from what God has said He believes about me. And the New Testament and even the Old Testament, they're full of God telling us what He believes about us, who we truly are. Okay, the words of my mouth. And then the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So you have the words and then the meditations. What are the meditations? Well, in our culture, generally, when people hear the word meditation, they think of transcendental meditation. The point, as I understand it, of transcendental meditation is to evacuate your mind so that you come to a point that you have no thought. Your mind becomes empty. There are some dangers in that, and to me, the primary danger is your mind is not made to sit empty. Now, there are those of us who we have cluttered our mind to the extent that it needs to become quieter. We have too many thoughts, and too many of them are founded in something other than truth. Okay, but I don't. That to me is not the same thing as empty your mind. This is my idea. I don't have any scientific evidence to base this on other than my own experience. When my mind is empty, or when I attempt to empty my mind, something will enter my mind. And part of my problems with transcendental meditation is that when I empty my mind, I don't think it's empty. Well, okay. I got lots more to say about that, but I don't think it honestly probably doesn't matter. Okay. There is this, though. When David wrote about meditation, he did not have transcendental meditation in mind. Instead of emptying his mind, he was filling his mind. Now, here's why I say that. I believe that the kind of meditation that David did was, especially when you take it in the full context of Psalm 19, where the vast majority of the entire psalm is taken up with thoughts and words and ideas about the law. And so it comes back to this. How do you meditate on the law? I talked about this briefly before, and so I'll talk about it again. When David meditated, he, I believe, saw himself living by the virtues, standards, values of the law. He saw himself doing and being what the law was designed to bring about. He saw himself in a way, I think his imagination was involved. He saw himself, he projected himself into living out the values and standards of the law. Not in some vague, fuzzy, ethereal way, but in specific situations of his life. I think this kind of meditation is so incredibly valuable because it sets us up to actually do a life, to live a life that conforms to God's design. David says that he wants the words of his mouth and the meditations of his heart. Okay, now let's bring it in here. A meditation of the mind is valid and valuable. And this is what I think primarily David's intentional meditation was. It involved his mind. But here he says, meditations of my heart. I think this, you can take it or leave it. For me, the meditations of my heart have to do with what I dwell on in terms of my affections and my desires. Because that, for the Hebrew and even the Greek and Roman, the heart was the seat and source of my affections, of my desires. Okay, this now gets maybe a little more complex. David says, I want the meditations of my heart. The desires, these are more than intellectual intentions. These are the desires that I have. I want them, he says, to be pleasing to you. There's our culture, our world has some goofy ideas about the desires of the heart. And if you want to hear the goofiest, you just show up to almost any commencement that's going to happen in May or June, where the commitment speaker says, follow your dreams, pursue your passion. Now, there is some truth in that, but here's the difficulty with it. So many of our passions and so many of our desires they don't fit with God's design. Those desires, those passions have to be disciplined. Well, and this is especially true in our relationship with God. Now, for David, that relationship was bounded on all sides by the law. And for us, it's bounded on all sides by grace. But still, I want the meditations of my heart. I want those deep-rooted, deep-seated desires and passions and, those heart things. I want them to be pleasing to God. My experience is the only way for that to happen is if somehow the Holy Spirit, by His grace, disciplines my desires. And that is not easy or fun. Maybe that's why it happens so rarely in my life. Not judging, but you should look into your own life about that. See you next time on Soap Care with Stevie Boy.